in a state of economic depression, in the state of depletion of the resources of our planet because of the greed of psychopaths who thought they could create their own reality. Well, look at the reality they created.
You're listening to The Truth Perspective on the Soft Radio Network. The world for people who think.
Welcome back to The Truth Perspective, everyone. Today, I am your host, Harrison Cayley. Joining me, it's been a while, Bo Christensen's joining us.
Hello.
And we've got William Barbet in the studio as well.
Hello, everyone.
And today we are pleased to have joining us Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman. Jim and Hugh are the authors of Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files. Now, this book came out in October 2015, I believe, and we're just getting around to it now. As soon as it came out, I saw it, but I didn't get around to reading it at the time. I put it on my Amazon wish list, and so finally we got a copy and managed to dig into it. And there's some amazing stuff in it. I remember the reason I was looking out for this book was a couple years ago Jim did a TEDx talk that was going around the internet for a while, which was really intriguing, and we'll be getting into some of the stuff that he talked about there and that Jim and Hugh both write about in the book. So to start out with, welcome to the show, Jim and Hugh. It's great to have you on.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
And to start out with, maybe you guys could just tell us a bit about both of you, how you came to come to this subject. I know there's a lot of subjects in the book, but kind of what led you to in this direction to eventually write this book? Maybe we can start with Jim and then go to Hugh.
Sure. I'm a stonemason by trade. I studied Native American history and civilizations or tribes around the country here in the U.S. for about 25 years, and I was just fascinated with Native American stonework that isn't very well known about in the eastern half of the country. We know about all the kivas and the cliff dwellings out in the southwest, but there were hillside forts and 55-foot stone mounds in Ohio and just really intriguing stone structures. And I ended up finding a lot of accounts in New England in the documents that talked about stone ruins existing before the colonists showed up. And by virtue of that search, I started to look through town and county histories, and I started to run in tangentially to these bizarre giant skeleton accounts all around New England. And I found they were often mentioned by professionals of the time, scientists and doctors and antiquarians, basically giving matter-of-fact descriptions of enormous skeletons, often obscurely buried in these documents like town and county history. So, I would delve into this and I would share my information with different people, with professionals, and I'd often get a lot of those are exaggerations and hoaxes, and it was the folklore of the time, or they were mastodon bones or whatever. And I didn't find that. I found that these were human burials, kind of uniquely and well-described human burials, like seating postures and anatomic anomalies, like the jawbone had fit over the face. So I just gathered steam, and I met Hugh, and we got together with Ross Hamilton, Micah Ewers, other researchers, and just compiled, essentially like 1,000 of these accounts in ancient America of 7-foot and taller skeletons, and then about 500 more worldwide, especially in Britain, Ireland, Italy, and France. And just the whole thing is fascinating and kind of a stunning alternative history, if you will.
Hugh, what about you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the Giants have just been something that's been, it's kind of been in my childhood really. I was obsessed by like Cyclops and things like this, but really it's to do with the megaliths, because in Britain, many of the megalithic sites, which I've been researching for many, many years, have legends and stories of giants associated with them. Even the founding of Britain has giant stories, with Brutus defeating the great giant Gog Magog down on the south coast. But, and I was kind of aware of this. I felt like it was all legend and just stories for a while. But then when I went to America, and actually, before I met Jim, I was exploring and researching all the megalithic sites in New England, right near where he lived, funnily enough. And at that time, I went to look at the mound culture sites. I came across the work of Ross Hamilton, and to some extent, David Hatcher Childress as well. I was actually staying in David Childress's house when Ross's book kind of fell off the shelf, and it's called A Tradition of Giants, and that was back in something like 2006, 2007. And I've kind of been researching. I knew about the giants in America, but that book really opened the door for me. And it made me realize this is a real phenomenon, and it utterly blew my mind. I read the whole thing in one sitting, and it really woke me up to the reality of these giants. And then I investigated some accounts down in Lompoc Rancho in California and other places. And eventually I met Jim at the conference that I organised back in 2011 in Glastonbury, Connecticut. We did a Megalithomania conference there, and we were talking a lot about giants. And Ross Hamilton, the legendary author of Tradition of Giants, who, by the way, we call the godfather of giantology for good reason, was speaking there via Skype. And I met Jim there. And from then on, we kind of realised, we have to kind of get our teeth into this. And we decided to put a book together. Like several years ago, this was. And that was probably in about 2012, 2013, we really decided to do it. But then History Channel kind of jumped in and stole Jim and did the search for the Lost Giants TV show. So it delayed the book a little bit, but it kind of correlated and came together. And we, now we're stretching, since the book's come out, more accounts have been discovered in North America, and it's kind of causing a bit of a sensation. We even got lots of skeptics really angry at us, which is a good thing. And now one of them is actually quite nice to us, apparently. And it really did open the door, that book and that TV show, and really pushed it into like the mainstream. And now we're kind of looking at Britain, we're looking around the world, and all these stories from the Bible, myths and legends. There's a huge reality there, and it's just the reason I'm fascinated by it, not just because they're tall people, that isn't particularly interesting in itself, but the fact that it's like being erased from the historical record. And so why is that? What's that all about? What is the reasoning behind that? So this is something we kind of investigate from that angle, and also the relationship to these sites. Because in America, you've got all the mound culture sites, and most, a majority of the discoveries or the accounts we've looked at are found within these mounds, or certainly nearby, or sometimes related to some stone sites as well. There's a few connections in New England and other places. But all around the world, the megaliths are connected with the giants. So this is something, we want to push forward with and see what we come up with.
Well, to get into some of the specifics for our listeners who haven't read the book or seen any of the videos, can you describe for us some of just what the typical account of these giants is? Like, so when you say giant, what do you mean, and what kind of remains or evidence have these people found? Like, what do you see in the historical records that you guys have discovered?
One thing I'd like to mention before we get into that is what I found really interesting, the way you guys wrote the book, is that you looked at a lot of these case histories, and you also tried to weed out what were the fake news and stuff. And I really appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we continue to do that. With the fake horn skull that goes around the internet, the Smithsonian Destruction of Skeletons report that was obviously false. You have to. This is a part of the whole dynamic of I'd say it's just across the board with human behavior. I found that agenda makes you stupid, and a lot of people have agendas, right? It's like we could live in this alternate universe in an echo chamber and whistle past the graveyard and not look at the other side of the argument. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I engage skeptics who are reasonable, who aren't a-holes, who I spoke at Andy White's anthropology class a couple months ago. I work with professionals. I work with teams of archaeologists and digs for my shows. Like we just did a new Roanoke special that's coming out at the end of the month. And I have a really good relationship with a lot of professionals, and I bring it to the toughest critics, and we debate these matters, these controversial subjects. But if you don't look at the full breadth of an issue and actively try to debunk things that aren't, have no veracity, then you're just kind of a snake oiler, in my estimation. So Hugh, myself, there's people we work with, like Ross Hamilton, Andrew Collins, Greg Little, objective, reasonable people who are looking at a very controversial topic. And to address what was reported and found, I'll say, it's really stunning. Like heads of anthropology and archaeology in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s are, along with the Smithsonian ethnologists at the turn of the century, are reporting 7 foot and tall skeletons routinely. 7'6", 7'8", over 8 foot tall. Giving dimensions and femur measurements, 28 inches, and circumferences of skulls like 36 inches in the Smithsonian Ethnology Report. And 1873, that's a really interesting one. One of the issues is a lot of these crumbled to dust. They were in ancient tombs opened up, and they talked about the scientists would pull the bones out and they crumble to dust, and it's like, that was thrown back at me like I made that up, frankly, so I didn't have to show evidence of giants, with my old TED Talk thing. But the honest truth is from like town and county histories and the Smithsonian Ethnology reports talk about that. Their own scientists talk about that. But there are remains that were put on display. The town is abuzz, and it just seems like it all happened at the wrong time. These burial mounds sat there for thousands and thousands of years. Obviously, natives never touched them because they were so revered. And then the Europeans came in and just destroyed and desecrated and try to basically, you can't destroy and celebrate a culture at the same time. And it wasn't part of evolution. The idea of giants, Native Americans that were sophisticated is something nobody wanted to see in power. They basically wanted to portray them as savage and disorganized. And the whole thing has ended up being a conundrum, and we're trying to piece together, the distant echoes of the past with all these records.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I'd like to hear more about, because, first of all, it's confusing. Like, why are they so interested in hiding the true history of things from us? So, obviously, if all this is true, and there certainly seems to be a lot of evidence that it is, it gets into an alternative theory of history that changes a lot of things and makes things very, very interesting from a factual point of view. Maybe you guys can talk about that some more.
Yeah, I'll jump in and then I'll let Hugh give his thoughts, just because, I like to make the point that there are conspiracies in the world. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. There's like ruthless oil companies and whacked out politicians and sociopaths running corporations and everything. But in the academic world, it is not a vast conspiracy. It couldn't even be a vast conspiracy, because you just can't, like these independent, men and women just doing their job. Mm-hmm. The problem that I see is the limits of science, what is considered evidence. And, you get into this realm, like I will talk about a lost civilization. We could talk about some things, but I'll get into like my friends who are anthropologists and archaeologists. I'll just say, hey, there's evidence mounting that there was a cataclysm, a flood, and and then it's just like the mind goes blank. It's like I just told him the Earth was 2,000 years old, or I just saw a dinosaur. Got unicorns grazing on the lawn, and so there is no like intellectual curiosity or drive beyond that point. Yeah. So you have, which I understand. It's just like there is the scientific world. It's like what I can dig in the ground and analyze. So there is no look at all the things we're talking about. It's really a matter of what is considered evidence also. Like oral traditions all around the planet are telling the same story. Mm-hmm. The Rosicrucians, Freemasons, the great mystics, religious documents. I'll talk to wisdom keepers all around the planet, and they'll tell the same alternative story. And it's funny, like I'll try to be succinct here. All the entities I just mentioned, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, oral traditions, they all say there was a great flood, a cometary impact. They all fear the Broom Star. There was giants and little people as part of a lost civilization, Atlantis. Edgar Cayce says it, the rest of them say it. And it's just this fascinating how they were all saying the same thing. A comparative mythologist would say the same thing. But then you have this vastly different story, a scientific story, that tried to wrestle away the throne from religion at the end of the 1800s. And, so it's not it's not Monsanto. It's, involving conspiracy. It's like an academic filtration that takes place. Human nature is in there. Mm-hmm. And these subjects have been portrayed as ridiculous, like religious-based and kooky. So if you even get near them, and I will say that, I'm a recovering Catholic. I'm not a Christian. I believe the Bible has a lot of documented truth in it. And I believe the Epic of Gilgamesh does, and the Torah and the Midrash and the mystics, so I'm not coming from any agenda. I just want to find the truth of the matter.
Hugh, did you want to give your 2 cents on that bit?
Yeah, I think you were asking about kind of why it's been covered up, why it seems to be like it's been sidelined. It seems like there's evidence of a conspiracy to cover up this whole idea of these giant skeletons, these giant people existing in prehistory. And that's something we tackle in the book, in the Smithsonian Files chapter. Originally when we wrote the book, before we wrote it, we were like thinking like a lot of other people that there was like an organized conspiracy, there was like an organized, thing to kind of close it down. And when we kind of did the research, we looked through all the old Smithsonian journals, we do find little bits of evidence of that. We do. And it's worrying that these high level, influential academic institutions don't mention the giants, even though they discover them in their own annual reports and write about them in their reports and discover them in the mounds and other such things. We've got 17 accounts from the Smithsonian themselves, between 7 and 8 feet tall. And then at the end of the book, where most of them are in, the conclusion, there's not one mention of them. So this is something, we've talked about recently with some other people. And it's a glaring kind of, it really is glaring. It really does make you question why they don't mention it when it's such an amazing discovery they're finding over and over again. But when you look at the politics and the history and the culture of what was happening during the 1800s in America, especially the late 1800s, we have evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution was taking shape. So the discovery of giant skulls that are 36-inch circumference, 40-inch circumference didn't really fit in with evolution. That was several thousand years old and things like this. Also, there was manifest destiny. So there was this whole movement of, sidelining the Native Americans, putting them on reservations and stopping them, moving forward with their lives and continuing their lifestyle as they had been for thousands of years. And so when you're finding Native American giant skeletons with huge skulls, means bigger brains, means they were super intelligent. It does not fit with the manifest destiny of trying to sideline them and steal their land and kill them and give them disease and things like this. So there was like political agendas in place as they started finding these giant skeletons and bones and skulls throughout North America. Mm-hmm. So it became like a problem for them. It was like an ongoing giant problem. And so this is something we noted in the book. So we kind of withdrew back from like shouting conspiracy constantly and actually just put the information together in the order, the order it all happened. And you can see that there's something quite dark going on there. Now, whether it's a big organized conspiracy, I don't think it is that. I think it's just a sequence of events linked with political agendas, also with, agendas that actually spread around the world. But it's really in the early 1900s when Ales Hadliczka came into power at the Smithsonian. And he was like, he was a pre-Nazi eugenist. He was into, claiming anyone who wasn't white was, far less superior than them and so on and so forth. So it became like this racist agenda that kind of came in with it. And that doesn't fit when these so-called Native Americans are actually, probably superior to modern humans at the time they were being discovered. So there's a lot going on there. We tackle it at length and thoroughly in the Smithsonian Files chapter, and that's the one to read if you want to see the kind of full story of what happened. One other thing quickly is in 1990, the NAGPRA Act, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, came into force, and that removed any grave goods, giant skeletons, bones, anything, mummies they found in the Southwest from public display. So all evidence is gone. So that was another level of kind of removing all the evidence as well. So there's more to it than meets the eye. Let's just say it like that.
So it sounds like to me it sounds like what you guys are saying. During the times when these reports were actually coming in, there were, let's say, like historical, valid from one perspective, reasons for why these things would be either ignored or covered up to an extent, and then that puts us in a particular situation today where, because these things weren't focused on at that time and made into these kind of historical scientific precedents, today what we're left to are just these kind of historical anecdotes that, you can't go to the Smithsonian and see any of these skeletons still on display. So the scientists today, they don't have the evidence to look at now, so all they hear is, oh, there were giants, and then they think that's ridiculous, like you're saying, Jim, like unicorns grazing on the lawn. So there's no real incentive to look at it, and there's also the fact that even if the people back then weren't thinking of it at the time, today, if this were to become big news where the scientific community actually took it seriously, there are huge implications that, like you said, challenge some very fundamental beliefs about history, the course of humanity, what was actually going on 12,000 years ago. Maybe we can go in that direction, but to get there, I want to ask about the kind of timeline of events here. So we've got all of these accounts of these giant skeletons, 7 to 8 feet tall, many of them, and who their remains are found. Now, I know that back then they didn't have the technology that we have today to do dating analyses on these samples. Is there any indication of how old these skeletons were? And a second related part of that question, I know there are some accounts of colonists coming over and actually encountering live giants. So I was wondering if you could kind of reconcile these two. Like, when were these giants actually there? Did they ever actually leave? When did they disappear? Maybe you can clear that up for us.
Yeah, I would say all the early explorers, the famous ones, Coronado, Magellan, John Smith in Virginia, Vespucci, from Patagonia to Virginia, they all encountered enormous native peoples, described between 7 and 9 feet, if you can believe it. Tuscaloosa in Alabama are almost 8 foot tall, and his son, the same size. These trained observers kept encountering giants and tribes of natives that were particularly tall. Thomas Jefferson, we read in the book, he meets Osage warriors 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and they were described as like noble and stately, handsome and awe-inspiring and massive. And we're not talking skinny NBA plays, like just huge, robust kind of beings or people being described. And the remains go back from 1700 to probably 1000 BC or something like that. We know the Adena people were particularly tall. The royal class elongated their skulls. These are the skeletons we find in the mounds in the eastern part of the country. The oldest mounds being the Adena ones, I believe. Well over 7 foot tall. And that poses the question: where do these tall ones come from? There are different stories. There's like there's the idea that the Native Americans, there was a royal class of more like benevolent of giant people, of the legend of the tall ones, the great civilizers who showed up after the flood 12,000 years ago. And then they speak of like a pre-flood malevolent race of giants all around the world. And the native peoples talk about them being cannibalistic and fierce with red hair, and we get the Lovelock Cave stories and the myths and legends. It's just a wild thing that all these native people. Now, if you look at the history, we keep going back, pushing back the dates in the United States, pre-Clovis, 18,000 years, Cactus Hill, Virginia, Meadowcroft Shelter, Monteverde. So the dates that continue to go back, and there's new theories being proposed, like the Solutrean hypothesis, or they came in boats or whatever. But there's a real mystery here, because it doesn't seem like out of Africa is meshing with the story of giants. It seems like was there a lost civilization that all these sources talk about? Was there an Atlantis that existed? And that's where everybody pinpoints, like Edgar Cayce and religious documents and Rosicrucians, Freemasons, that there were giant people, part of the civilization. Are they the ones that landed in the Bible land? And did they land in the United States like the Native Americans would probably say? So it's once again, it's like, what do you listen to as evidence? And I understand trying to piece together this view of the past through anthropological study, through skeletal remains study, but at the same time, you can have coexisting realities like uniformitarianism in geology and catastrophism. It's obvious there's been catastrophic events. The two can coexist. And in anthropology, we could have another story. Evolution is real, I believe, but there's another story. There's genetic intervention. There's a curveball somewhere. They just found hobbits in Indonesia in 2002, 2003. It's for me, like all throughout history, when are we going to learn our lesson? Galileo was put onto house arrest. Velikovsky with Worlds in Collision, he was derided. Graham Hancock, who I think is brilliant and reasonable and objective, he's always catching heat. He's being mocked like he's a pseudoscientist or whatever. And it's just like, pull your head out of your ass and look at these things objectively. And I would not, to arrogantly look at like we have all the answers, is idiotic. What do we have wrong? What's the 14% of theories that we have wrong? Let's look at them as a society.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you mentioned some of the legends about the pre-flood giants being kind of, let's say, evil and cannibals, but then you also mentioned the more recent, giants, let's say post-flood, as being kind of revered as the benevolent leaders. They're kind of a ruling class. Is there anything more to that? Like, what else do the legends say? Because there seems to be that kind of like a shift in the thinking and the description of, let's say, the psychological nature of these giants.
Yeah, Hugh, you want to?
I'll tackle this one. That's a very good point. I mean, there's a very kind of jagged timeline, really, trying to work out who was around when, especially in North America, which we've been focusing on. But even before the so-called flood, what we think in the book we talk about the Younger Dryas impact event. But there is evidence in the oral tradition, the Native American folklore of, and it's very strong, it's very realistic, of giants existing way back then at the same time as the megafauna. And then we find you find mummified remains in America, often with red hair, some of them supposedly very tall. In Lovelock Cave, you have the Spirit Caveman, you have Kennewick Man, obviously, not mummified, of course, and then you have discoveries that are 7,000 years old, the bog mummies of Florida, and so forth. So there is a timeline there. But interestingly, something that is sort of strangely fascinating is that there's all these stories of cannibalism, and it's really quite freaky when you get into it, because even the Lovelock Cave mummies, which could be several thousand years old, the Paiute tribe at the time, this is written about by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins back in the 1800s. They talk about the legends of this race of red-haired people, these vicious kind of tall people around the area of Humboldt Lake and Lovelock Cave, who used to terrorize them and eat them, and actually just eat them for breakfast and lunch and dinner and so forth. Yum, yum. And so you have this kind of problem that they have to deal with. And then you start looking into it and you realize many of the legends talk about this. They often talk about being attacked, being harassed by these man-eating giants all over the country. I mean, literally everywhere. And then there's actual evidence that's been found in Lovelock Cave of marrow being extracted from human bone because they're eating it. So we know it's a real thing. There's other pieces of archaeological evidence as well to back that up, all the way from like Catalina Island all the way up to New England, up to Maine. We find examples, and so you have this thing of like, there's like these benevolent kind of elites who were probably linked with. They were probably the precursors of the Adena, probably coming down from Canada and the Northwest, probably about 6,000 years ago, who were benevolent, and they interbred between the elite kind of tribes, the tribal leaders, like the royal class, who were like smart, intelligent. They were passing on the knowledge and the sophistication that is evident in the mound culture sites and in their kind of world. But at the same time, there's these other groups who weren't like that. They were extremely tall. They were giants, but they were not anything like the Adena. They were like, cannibalistic. There'd be great wars between different tribes. And this is strange because you find the same kind of stories in the ancient texts, like the Old Testament, the book of Enoch, the book of giants within the book of Enoch, even the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like this, and other legends and other ancient texts around the world. So there's a parallel. It's almost like there's two different classes of these giants. But then you look into it further and you find other types of giants, and so it's quite confusing, but we try and tackle it, especially in the realm of North America and just beyond the borders, to give it some kind of to give a kind of understanding of what we know of now. More discoveries will probably be made as more DNA tests done, but we know that there were the Patagonian giants that lived up to at least the 15 or 1600s, and they were photographed on further south than Patagonia, actually in the Antarctic, in 1901 by Captain Cook at the time. So there is evidence of giants in different parts of the world living right up to that time. And the DNA thing is really interesting. We when we wrote the book, we did all the latest research, all the latest data on the DNA and the migrations, and it's quite startling when you really think about it. But one of the things that I was very strongly kind of convinced of is that there may have been an origin point within North America itself of these giants, because that's what a lot of the legends state. But that's still more research needs to be carried out there.
What do you mean by an origin point? What might be the hypotheses that on what's the nature of that origin point?
This is the idea of it's called American Genesis. This is like a theory that's been going around for about 15 years, but never taken seriously. First put forward by Jeffrey Goodman, who's an archaeologist, and actually wrote a book called American Genesis. It's been taken on by some other people. Even one of the dental anthropologists we actually interviewed for the TV show and book, and she's now talking about that like the beginning of man as such, it's not all out of Africa 100,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. There's different points around the world where humans originated. They didn't necessarily come from one place or from apes or whatever. There's a whole different theory coming forth. And when you look at North America, there are skulls that are like modern human, kind of almost Cro-Magnon type skulls that have been found in North America that date back 70,000 years. They date back 45,000 years before Cro-Magnon man emerged in Europe around 44,000 years ago. And so we have to question, which way were the migrations going? Was there something going on in North America in deep prehistory and in Central and South America and Canada, of course? And the Pacific was linking up all these different cultures to different parts of the world. There's certainly a lot of evidence for that now. There's skulls in Brazil, and they go back to nearly 100,000 years. There's cave paintings that are much older. And so it really puts the whole idea of like this deep prehistory into a whole different perspective. But I think, your question was like, what is this origin point thing? Well, it really is just about, where humans really came forth on the planet. And, where they came from is a whole different matter, because when you look at the legends in North America, crikey, it's like they almost came down from the sky. They were called thunderbirds, and they transformed into humans and things like this. So it's kind of parallel somewhat with the Nephilim and the Watchers and all that lot in the Bible. So it's strange, but we tackle as much as we can in the final chapter of the book.
Well, could I?
Yeah, go ahead.
My thoughts. Yeah. You almost have to concede with this alternate view, like an almost supernatural creation of Homo sapiens 200,000 years ago. That's what Edgar Cayce says. He says it took place in a continent in the middle of the Atlantic. You have the Australopithecines that turn into the Homo genus, and you have Homo erectus in Dmanisi, Georgia, that was found a couple of years ago, 1.8 million years. So you have these theoretical precursors to Homo sapiens. But there is a school of thought I was just reading about how Crick, who came up with basically the godfather of the DNA genome, really thought there was some kind of almost alien intervention, to create Homo sapiens. I really think that when it wouldn't be American Genesis in my eyes. It'd be like out of Atlantis instead of out of Africa. And that sounds bizarre, but there's still a lot of questions about where Homo sapiens come from. There seems to be this bizarre acceleration that took place, and then boom, you have this species that is far more advanced. It's like the DNA of Homo erectus or some of the cousins of humans might have been used in some genetic engineering experiment, if you will. That's basically, when you read the Epic of Gilgamesh in the Bible and the mystics, they're all talking about like a supernatural founding of Homo sapiens. And I know that's tough to swallow, but it's across the board. It's in all the myths and legends, and it's really an interesting thing to think about. You have so much stunning similarity around the world that is beyond coincidence. If you read Graham Hancock stuff and you look at the Quetzalcoatlus and the Viracochas and the great civilizers who showed up after the flood, they're carrying these man bags all around the world. So it's not like the similar iconography is well beyond just one item. They are the repromulgators of civilization. They all have the same attributes. They're tall and bearded, and they have these man bags. It's just astounding. You see 6 fingers and 6 toes all around the planet in statues and petroglyphs. And then in the Bible, the giant of Gath has 6 fingers and 6 toes. It's that level of specificity through myth and legend, petroglyphs, religious documents, historical narratives, the mystics and the secret societies that just stuns me. And that's what the professional doesn't go around the world looking at these things. They're only looking to debunk. Put the giant skull on my desk. If not, don't bother me. And whatever. I'm not dissing anyone. I'm just saying, the whole breadth of this is like, it's so stunning and hidden in plain sight.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the things you guys were talking about there just reminded me of something. Now, I think I first read about this in a book by Laura Knight Yadchik. We've had her on the show a few times, called Comets and the Horns of Moses. And she found a report about the Tunguska cometary explosion over Russia in, I think it was 1906, something around there. And some scientists found that there were actually some genetic mutations that happened to the life forms around that area. And that kind of, in the book, it sparks this kind of idea that cometary bombardments can induce kind of these genetic changes. And for me, that raises the question, because you guys mentioned all these flood myths and the idea of the cometary bombardment around 12,000 years ago that caused this massive destruction over North America. I know Graham Hancock wrote about it in his latest book, and Firestone and West and them wrote about it in their book from several years ago. So we've got these ideas of cometary bombardments that have been largely ignored in the academic world, but there is a small group of scientists that are working on this, doing very serious and very good work on it. And then we've got this idea of evolution and how these if you look at the historical evolutionary record, there are these kind of punctuations in the record where there's periods of extremely rapid development. And so I'm wondering if there might be a connection with this catastrophism, because possibly with these comets. Because if you think about it, a new species comes from the air. Well, there may be a supernatural element to that, but that might be kind of inextricably intertwined with a physical aspect, being this chaotic introduction of these cometary bombardments, which come repeatedly, cyclically throughout history, that kind of introduce this whole level of mutation in the species existing on the planet, and that might be the kind of let's say mechanism for this like rapid growth, rapid development of new and more complex species. I was just wondering. Well, I just wanted to throw that out there and see if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'll just give my quick. It's very good to remain sober and scientific. There's no question about it. And I often say I wish this mystery wasn't so seemingly supernatural, if you will, because I'm the kind of guy that I'll go to Pumapunku, I'll look at a stone, I'm like, let's give a piece of gray andesite to 10 master sculptors with the tools of the time, and I don't think they'll be able to do that. Or let's date this site, or let's look at how Sacsayhuaman was built. I could show you examples that are just outrageous that I don't think the people of the time could have pulled off. Or let's see why there's elongated skulls all around the planet. Mm-hmm. But the honest truth is, like Edgar Cayce, the Bible, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, Plato, Madame Blavatsky, and all these religious documents talk about like the original Homo sapien, or the Adam, if you will, being an androgynous being. And every culture has the myths and legends. Quetzalcoatl was the son of an androgynous being. And they essentially talk about the birthing of the human race of Homo sapiens like being this kind of like a supernatural event from an androgynous being. It sounds so strange to say, but if you spent 486 hours researching it like I have, you just see all around the world the hermaphrodite statues, the representations of these like a supernatural androgynous god. You wonder why you have two versions of history, right? One is like the one that we're all taught that flies in the face of every religious document, every myth and legend, every conceivable alternative piece of information that has come from the past. Like it's just stunning how different they are. Mm-hmm. And then the honest truth is, what I'm talking about, what we're talking about here, this alternate view of history that has some supernatural elements to it, I honestly and firmly believe it's mostly accurate. And in 50 years, we're going to look at that model as much more accurate. Just think of how precise and important these oral traditions are all around the planet that is saying the same thing, how accurate they are, how science keeps proving through tsunami frequency understanding and all this stuff. And I just find it, there's two models, and I just find that one is just much more stunningly accurate and lines up with all the oral traditions. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds weird,
No, that's all right.
Yeah. And it's funny because, I appreciate Graham Hancock. He's really, being objective and being scientific, and Randall Carson. And, I went down and talked to Al Goodyear down in South Carolina at the Topper site, the 55,000-year-old pre-Clovis site that he believes he found. And, I'm walking in both worlds. I just have to say, as an investigator and a detective, my gut is leading me in different direction. It's mm-hmm. stunning, the symbol iconography, the myths and legends, and it just draws me in that direction without agenda, quite frankly.
Yeah, and when you look at it, I mean, it is a massive mystery, and it's one that's been totally ignored by the scientific community. And when you look at it, I mean, like there aren't, well, at least at this point in time, we really only have a limited toolkit of ideas, of different, possible causes and how this happened. And, one isn't very satisfying, and that's the largely uniformitarian, evolutionary story, which just doesn't mesh with a lot of the facts. And then you've got this supernatural version that, I mean, when you look at it's a good explanation for what it is, because you look at it and you say, well, what else could it be? There may be that mysterious, unknown third explanation, but as it is, we've got these stories, and, they do tend to account for the facts, as we see them. So I think that's at least a starting point from which we have to go. And like you said, in 50 years, I think if people are at least giving the, not necessarily the benefit of the doubt, but just acknowledging these stories and looking at them, I think will make a lot more development or a lot more progress in understanding this, the real history of humanity than by ignoring it.
Totally. I don't want to hog all the time, but that's a great point. And satisfying is exactly it. It's like one version answers like every possible inquiry and mystery in human history. The alternative / kind of almost supernatural-ish one. It's like, okay, I understand what the Greeks were talking about gods and demigods and titans and a lost, continent in the Atlantic that Plato was talking about. I understand what the natives are talking about now, about, little people and giants. It's like, it's not all fanciful nonsense. I understand what the wisdom keepers are talking about, the ancient ones who built these sites with a lost technology. And then you have the official one that is so unsatisfying. Your gut tells you. It's funny. It's like you get into an orientation when you're a professional. I've traveled in those realms, and I understand. It just like deadens your intellectual curiosity or your love of mythology. Why do people love Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones? They intuitively know, they tap into the collective mind that understands there's a different view of history that is true, that's been wiped from the map with a PTSD-ridden cataclysmic event. So we're piecing it together. And guys like you and I are doing it like for the love of it, just like I get paid like, 2 cents an hour for my giant research, sell a couple books here and there, but I don't give a rat's ass. I think it's fascinating. And I really believe the version of history you're talking about will be found to be true in the coming decades. And it's only a matter of time where they find a site much older than Göbekli Tepe. I must say that.
Well, one of the things I also wanted to ask you guys about, and brought up in the book, is the idea that these giants were building the megalithic sites, specifically the mounds in the eastern U.S. mostly, and even in the Henges in the UK. And you brought up lost technology, and these mounds are very fascinating in their astronomical alignments and just the amount of work that's involved in building these mounds, just the giant size of them. And so I'd just like to ask, what's going on there with all these mounds?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Yeah, basically, there's over, I think there's over 100,000 recorded earthworks in North America. There's at least 10,000 huge mounds, certainly in different shaped earthworks just in the Ohio Valley. Many of them have been destroyed. Many are on private land. Many have been flattened and things like this. But, you've got to look at it from different perspectives. There's different timelines here. Again, if you go much further south, right down to Louisiana and almost on the Gulf Coast, you've got Poverty Point, you've got Watson Brake, you've got there's one other site, Jackson, I forget the name of it actually. I actually visited this recently, about a year ago. And they go back to between 3,000 and 3,800 years BC. And they're the oldest known mound sites in America. There are shell mounds on the California coast. There's one date one bit of carbon dating that goes back 20,000 years, which is, we can't quite get my head around that one, but I'm not sure if it was a bad technology at the time when they did it, I'm not sure, but it's there and it's in the record, and we mention it very briefly in the book, I think. But mainly you've got the Adena mounds, which date from officially around no more than really 1,000, 1,300 BC. Please correct me here, Jim, if I make any mistakes. And then we have the Hopewell mounds, probably from something like 400 AD onwards, and then the later cultures like Fort Ancient and other such people come in and change them. But the Adena ones are the most interesting. This is where the real research is happening. We've got our good friend Greg Little and Andrew Collins are working on this, and a few other people. And this is the really relationship with the giants, and this is what they're found in. They're literally found inside, buried deep, often below ground level, deep below in the ground. So often they're not above ground level. People don't realize this. And they're stone chambers. Some of the mounds, like Miamisburg, had stone facing on it as well, so it's more like a pyramid. And there's other such sites which are just so large, like Newark, and ones around Chillicothe, which are massive, complex geometric earthwork systems covering many, many acres, which encode geometry, metrology, astronomical alignments, geodesy, linking up with other sites around the country. We have similar ones down in Florida. You get them way up north as well, along the whole northern Canada edge, you know, going up to the Great Lakes. Literally, you know, mainly they grip around the kind of Mississippi, but they spread out from there. But you do find them in different parts of the country, and there's so many of them, and they're quite sophisticated. They've got stone enclosed within them, and the giants are involved. And so we have to question, you know, why is this overlooked as a reality that these giants may have been involved in the construction of these mounds? You get remarkably similar earthworks much further south, you know, going into the Olmec world in Central America, the other side of the Gulf Coast. They have mounds there. They have earthworks. They have huge cities made of earth with stone facing and stone chambers within them. It's very similar, in fact, when you really look into it. In Britain, Europe, you got obviously a very similar thing, which is probably a bit older. So you have to question, did the influence come from Europe, or which way round was it? Because the very earliest ones in North America are kind of on par with some of the oldest ones here. And so you got, you know, there's a big question mark about who was doing what and when. But again, many of these sites in Britain, there's legends and stories, and we found accounts of giants as well, not in the same extent as we find in North America, most notably the Ohio Valley, but most certainly, you know, there are correlations with the metrology, the geometry, the design, the style spec, the legends, the stories, the astronomy, and so forth. So, you know, it does fit the theory that there was a great culture in prehistory that influenced all, you know, cultures all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it reminded me of was the reason why I think there is some sort of Atlantean connection here is because if you read about like Plato's description of Atlantis, I believe Andrew Collins wrote a book about that. Many of the Atlantean cities, at least that Plato described, are similar in the earthworks and the moats and the raised terraced areas where like the people would live, and it really reminded me of that and how it supports the idea of an Atlantean kind of dispersal of people throughout at least the United States.
Yeah. Good point. Greg Little's book about Edgar Cayce's legacy of the mound builders. Edgar Cayce gave 68 readings on the mound building people. It was really, it's so odd that Cayce basically gave readings. If people don't know Edgar Cayce, he had an 8th grade education, and he would go into a trance state in the late, you know, from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, I think, and. Anyways, he gave all these health readings, but then he started to talk about lost civilizations and past lives, you know, out of nowhere, and they recorded this. It's at the ARE Library in Virginia Beach. So anyways, Cayce talked about the mound builders in 68 different readings. He talked about the ones in the mound builders in Florida being of a much larger stature than the current people of today, and they were proportionally large, which is interesting because the skeletal accounts we find always talk about proportion. But anyways, he talked about the influence of essentially the early mound builders around 3000 BC came up to avoid the sacrifice cults that were going on, and they were more benevolently oriented. And a lot of the earthworks, like at Portsmouth, Ohio, you see the exact duplicate representation of Plato's central city of Atlantis. It's in Greg Little's book. It's in our book, too. We got permission from Greg. But it's this earthwork, this ringed earthwork that Squire and Davis surveyed and cataloged before it was destroyed. It is just stunning how similar it is. And, you know, Cayce's saying this thing, and then bam, right here you have this kind of freak show similarity going on. And archaeologists have never been able to describe why there's moats there. You know, it's the oddest thing. All around the planet, we have pyramids everywhere. We have the most enigmatic and crazy things. The creator gods are rocking handbags and the similar iconography, right? You would think if history were this boring kind of version that we're getting, we would have this kind of mundane landscape. It's like we dropped on a freaking alien world, and it makes no sense because we're looking at it the wrong way, and we're not looking at it through the eyes of myths and legends and oral traditions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading Greg Little's Mound Builders book right now. It talks about Cayce's readings, and it really is fascinating, and how Cayce is talking about things that only came to light much later because of archaeological findings and the idea that the lost tribes of Israel populated the U.S. and then went down to Mexico City, and the Adena cultures, and even coming down from Canada as well. These mounds, like the Serpent Mound, if anyone looks at the building of them, it's really quite fascinating to me.
Absolutely. I mean, you could jump in there, but I'm glad you're reading that book. It's awesome. I'm writing a book on the search for Edgar Cayce's Lost World right now. And when we traveled in Peru and Bolivia, every outrageous megalithic site we encountered, Cayce's talking about it essentially like being an Atlantean colony. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and I understand that impulse is like, it's like you're talking about, oh, it's so wacky and crazy, you're out of your mind, but it's like, wow, man, shit, is this how they did it? I would look at, you can't get a micron, forget about a hair or razor blade, between so much stonework and, for me as a stonemason, it is like, you can't express to people how effed up the stonework is.
Yeah, I mean, if like one of the videos you have, you're showing one of these dolmens, and they're just so huge. It's like, how did they ever get there? The dolmens, the weight of these stones, just like at Stonehenge. I just am befuddled.
Giants did it.
How'd they do it? Did they just lift these things up? Did they have amazing technological abilities? Did they have things that we're not aware of?
I'll jump. You can answer. Yeah, Cayce says specifically they used like gases, lasers, vibration, sound. That they had this technology that helped them build a site like Sacsayhuaman, or so. And at the same time, I'll say let's not underestimate human capability, because we know the Romans built incredible stuff, hundreds of tons. So you just can't look at everything and say that's impossible. There's a lot that humans did that is whacked out, but then there are things that are off the hook that, ironically, Cayce identifies in his readings. So I'll throw it to Hugh. He probably has his own thoughts.
I mean, just looking at the stories and the legends, and even discoveries, in mounds near Stonehenge, they found extremely tall skeletons. And there's, the earliest legend of Stonehenge talks about Merlin employing giants to move the stones for him, and also, talking about technology. They had thousands of soldiers went over to Ireland to collect the so-called stones from Killaroos to bring them to Stonehenge for King Aurelius and all this kind of stuff. But, this is all in the History of the Kings of Britain, this classic book by Geoffrey of Monmouth written in the 1100s. And they couldn't move the stones, they couldn't deconstruct the site, they couldn't get it over to England, so they got giants involved. And Merlin used something called gears, or used a gear to move it, and he did it easily with his gear or gears and whatever. So what is that? It's some kind of technology that he was using. Other stories say that he levitated the stones. He was able to manipulate the stones and move them. So just at Stonehenge, the most famous megalithic site on the planet, you have these stories. And you find that in other places as well. You find these stories of sound technology, being able to levitate stones. You have Coral Castle, obviously, in Florida, which I visited a few years ago, which is Edward Lidscalnin built a massive megalithic site in the 1950s. And so, there's something going on. So the technology is there. If one 5-foot Latvian guy can build Coral Castle, then 100 normal-sized people who are smart can build a megalithic site. Whether they use, how they did it is a whole other question. But the clues are there. It's just a case of reconstructing that. And hopefully with this new TV show, Jim's going to build, an equivalent of the Great Pyramid, aren't you, Jim?
Full size?
Yeah. I'll be enlightened soon. I wanted to throw out, Hugh, you said, you talked about Stonehenge. The earliest representation of Stonehenge is on a tapestry from the 12th century, and Merlin's hanging with the giant who's putting up a stone, right?
That's correct, yeah. He's actually, like, the giant is kind of lifting the lintel into place under the direction of Merlin. And this is the earliest ever picture of Stonehenge that's ever that's known about, and yet it's in all the Stonehenge books. But there's no one mentions the sort of the elephant in the room, that there's a giant lifting the stone up. So hang on a sec. So is that a reality? And then as you'll see in one of our forthcoming books, we're going to be looking at Stonehenge. We're going to be looking at Britain. And I've started. I live right near Stonehenge, so I've been doing research in this area, and it's amazing what I've come up with already. Jim's collected a few accounts a couple of years ago, and I've been researching those, going into more detail. And just in the local town here, there's a 9'4" giant was dug up. There's a giant effigy used to be paraded through the local town for hundreds of years. It links with St. Christopher, who was like a Canaanite giant from the Bible, who apparently came to the area around Stonehenge. And so there's some weird stuff going on that a lot of people don't have a clue about. So this is why we're kind of pushing the research in different parts of the world now, because it's not really being researched. It's not really being published. And we feel it's important to kind of find these links and get them out there in a book format. I think it's really essential, in fact.
Well, I wanted to ask you about one other type of, human remains or human-looking remains that have been found. But before I get to that question, you just mentioned that you guys are working on another book. I wanted to ask, first of all, what you've discovered, in the time since you published this book that is relevant, and then if you guys can just describe some of the projects you're working on now and when we might be able to, see them in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim's coming over here. We're going to be working on, we're kind of keeping it under wraps a little bit because we haven't fully decided on the exact kind of format yet. But basically, I'm harassing Jim that we do a book on giants in Britain because, we want to do a worldwide book. We want to kind of, do all that kind of thing. But there's so much going on here. I've been digging into the records. Jim's done a ton of research already. And there's so much here, and there's only one or two books that have been written about it, like back in the 1970s. The brilliant book called Sowers of Thunder by Anthony Roberts. I do recommend that if people are interested in ancient British giants and giant lore and folklore. It's a brilliant book, absolutely inspirational. And he's a big influence on me, actually. He was like contemporary with another of my mentors, John Michel. And so, yeah, and then we're going to be looking around the world. We've got ideas for other things. We want to, get into, because we both put our heads together over a lot of megalithic research, and things like this. So yeah, there's a lot of potential. We've got some TV shows we're hoping to get moving in the next year or two. And yeah, we're just going to keep working, keep pushing forward, and discoveries are being made. I mean, there's been discoveries. There's a very recent one Jim could talk to you about in Malaysia, and he actually investigated this of a very tall skeleton that was uncovered. There's more accounts from America. They're getting sent to us. Giant artifacts in North America. I've located some giant bones in England that Jim and I are going to go and look at when he comes here. And we're hoping to kind of look at the ones in Castelnau in France. We're going to investigate that, and so on and so forth. So there's, it's like a constant quest to try and find out the truth of these mysteries.
Yes.
Jim, did you want to talk about that Malaysia case a bit?
There's a historian who reported finding bones of enormous dimensions. And then there were grave sites in Malaysia too, on this island that are enormously long. I talked to the Malaysian Tourist Bureau. I've thrown out a bunch of emails. What I got back was, my feeling is like, he's claiming to have handled bones of like 9 foot tall humans or something like that, which is well out of normal range. So I haven't got in touch with the historian. I feel like, it might smack of a little, and not clickbaiting, but I haven't, like there was a story a couple of years ago in the Kala region, northern Iraq. It says bones of 10-foot men found. I'm like, AK News put it out, which was a legitimate Kurdish television network. So I hunted down the story because AK News went out of business. I got in touch with Dalal, what's his name? Sorry. His name will come in. Zuma Dilshad, a professor of Assyrian studies in Leiden, the Netherlands, and he's from the Kala region in northern Iraq. And those douchebags from Syria, from ISIS, are like destroying the place right now. But one of his students found 3 skeletons. One was 7'7" with a 12-inch skull. One was badly damaged, and one was a child skeleton. So the story got it all wrong, reporting 10-foot men. But what I did find out was there was like a 7'7" skeleton with a 12-inch skull. I don't know if it's been how studied it's been, because obviously there's a ton of conflict right there. But these are the stories you got to look into. You just can't sit back and and that's one of the problems. There's so much BS on the internet that if you don't debunk this stuff, if I could be a debunker, quite frankly, I could sit back and pick and choose and be a big hero and pretend I'm smarter than everyone. And, but I if I'm going to look into the tough cases, I got to look into the weak ass cases too and debunk them. And Hugh does it. Andrew does it. Hancock does it. I really appreciate that. Brian Forrester does it. These are all authors you should read if you're interested in these studies. So I'll throw out that I'm on January 23rd, I think it is, here in the United States, my brother and I did a second 2-hour documentary on the lost colony of Roanoke and the Dare Stone. And if I will say myself, it came out pretty slick. We've fought to raise the IQ of the show, the shows we do, create a different model. We work with, I think, a dozen different professionals in a sense of camaraderie to figure out these problems. And I know people, Search for the Lost Giants ran a couple of years ago, and I've been traveling and researching and conceiving the last couple of years of a broader show that I want to do with Hugh and my brother, basically looking into a wide range of anthropological and archaeological mysteries with native voices, independent research voices, and skeptical professional voices all working together on different investigations around the world. So that's what I'm conceiving of, and I think that we'll be able to formulate and pull off this show in the next year or so, and I hope sooner than later, but I'm very confident. I'm speaking at the ARE conference in Virginia Beach in October. Eric Von Daniken and Andrew Collins will be there. I'm working on a book with Hugh, and I'm working on a book on Edgar Cayce's Lost World right now. And I'll say to any listener right now who's tuning in, what we're talking about, I won't speak for myself, but the rest of you are intelligent and thoughtful people who are trying to piece together the story of humanity. Everybody seems to be a voracious reader. Nobody's like a manic weirdo who corners you in the street and talks your head off. It's just like we're presenting reasonable evidence to try to figure out about myths and legends and things like that. So, I think it's don't engage trolls and debunkers. Just make your case and let it rest. And people, the right people will find it. And eventually, and it's gaining steam. People are catching on to this idea of a lost world. It's really gaining steam. And I'll just say that I thoroughly believe, without agenda, that what we're talking about today will be viewed as fairly more accurate than what the present model is, And I guess I'll end with that.
Well, you mentioned Brian Forster. That's actually what I wanted to ask you guys about, because in the book you've got some of the photos of these elongated skulls. And one of the points, well, I'll just give a little bit of a background. I mean, when I first encountered the elongated skulls, it seemed like a kind of anomaly. Not a lot of people were talking about it, and it seemed like, oh, well, here's a few photos of these elongated skulls, and that was kind of it. And so, for a while I was like, oh, well, that's really cool, kind of weird. But it's only been in the last several years, I think, that so many more photographs and actual specimens have come forward, and Brian Forster has done a lot of that work, and he's got a great YouTube channel where he goes to obscure little museums and looks at these skulls. And the thing about them is that they are actually larger skulls than normal, because there is this phenomenon of binding the skulls to shape them in that kind of cone head shape. But these are actually skulls that have a bigger cranial volume than a normal skull. So there's actually more matter than a normal skull. Really strange looking skulls. I was wondering First, if you could just tell us a bit about these skulls and what, if any, connection they have to the things we've been discussing, like giants, the mounds or anything like that. And also that a lot of these skulls, first of all, have been found in like South America, but I think you guys mentioned some that have been found in, what was it, Florida? Can you guys talk about that?
Yeah, Hugh can go because I just ran my mouth, but absolutely. In Malta, Pumapunku, we just saw all the skulls in the museum on the tour, but I would like to throw my 2 cents after Hugh talks, please.
All right.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually elongating my skull as we speak with cranial deformation hats. I'm only joking. But basically, they're all over the world, these skulls. They're not just in South America. I mean, I spend time with Brian. We run tours every November. We go to Peru together. Jim came with us just in November previously, and we had a good look at some of these, and they're utterly amazing. Some of them are just so large. They have different amount of sutras. They've got red hair. They're like this elite culture along the whole west coast of South and Central America. I've seen them in Olmec land all over Mexico. I've seen them some in North America. Quite a few mound sites in North America have these skulls. Some of them are related to giants. We know. We feature it in the book in the anatomic anomalies chapter. We have a whole area about cranial deformation, elongated skulls. So there is a relationship. The elite were doing this to their skulls. There is a strange theory coming forth based on DNA evidence, actually, that indeed some of them are natural, because there's been babies and fetuses found that have elongation of their skulls. So it's like a natural thing that can occur as well. So this is where it gets weird, and like there's almost like a different DNA kind of thing going on. They've been found across Europe, the Middle East, South Pacific, Japan, almost every country in Russia, around the world, Africa, Egypt, the list goes on. So it was something that people liked to do in prehistory. Now, why they did that, I have no idea. Whether it was something to do with a lot of people say it's to do with the elite or royal class. It could be to enhance the pineal gland. It could be to emulate the gods who were around thousands of years ago. It could be to, enhance, the faculties of the brain. So you could then, maybe it'll enhance certain glands. So your telekinetic or psychic abilities will be increased, or your intelligence even. And so, yeah, you do get that. And I think there's a connection. There's one area we write about a whole chapter about in the book, actually, about Sonora in Mexico. Jim could talk about this maybe a bit more detail, but there's an area where in the 1930s, a whole load of giant skeletons, mummified remains with red hair were found up to 8 feet tall, I believe. And more recently, this was all forgotten about. This is all covered up. Smithsonian were involved in it. And then more recently, in I think 2012, within 20 miles of there, at another site, probably more modern, a little bit more recent, probably 1,000 or 2,000 years old or something, a whole bunch of elongated skull skeletons were found, extreme elongation. And that's just raised so many questions. So, were these two different elite cultures, were they kind of, did they know about each other? Were they around at the same time? And again, this is one aspect of prehistory which is very neatly covered up, and we have to question why that is.
Yeah, I'd say it's another example of cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. We're all doing the most extreme and bizarre, unthinkable thing that couldn't just have been conjured up by some 100 monkey syndrome, and it shows you that, like Brian, basically, independent researcher, brought this all to light, mostly, himself. I know he worked with like David and other people, and other people have studied this mystery, but his consistent effort brought this to light. Now it's just like people looking like, what the hell is going on, which shows that, I think, frankly, Hugh and I did it with the idea of giants. We've kind of brought this idea to life with people like giants. What the hell, and Graham Hancock has done stuff, Richard Casserow with all this God self icon around the planet. There's a lot of independent research who study similar iconography and stuff. So it shows you if you put your effort into one of these mysteries, you can like push it forward. But it's another example, like I said, it's the most bizarre activity You know, and when I was talking to Todd Disotell, the molecular anthropologist who I had on our show, who I love, he's a great guy. He just kind of like, I said, you're kidding me. Like, all around the planet area was elongated in the skulls. I mean, it's just like, and there was no like intellectual curiosity to go beyond that point. I understand he studies physical remains, but it's like, study these, dude, or just at least like come up with a reasonable theory, you know? And once again, the reasonable theory is it's like a shared mother culture or a diffusionism or something else. Something else is going on. How the hell can you just do the most bizarre thing to your freaking kids all around the world, you know, head binding? And, you know, once again, it's like the 50th thing that strongly indicates that there was a shared mother culture in my eyes.
Well,
and I want to talk, and Brian is a brilliant guy. I want to talk his game up for a minute. If you go for a tour, definitely go with Brian and Hugh down there. I found Brian to be objective, intelligent, and reasonable, and he's often portrayed as like some nut, you know, like some certain skeptics who I like to run their head through a wall, you know, like they like to run their mouth and hide behind their computer and like take shots at people. But it's not like they want to find the truth. They just want to like feel better by belittling people, which, you know, I should be more forgiving. But there are certain trolls that get under my skin that run their mouth that are just, you know, the POSs. They just can't get a hit. So they're getting a dopamine hit by like deriding people who really care. Like Brian cares. He's like a wonderful guy. He's working hard. He cares about human history, and he's going to be proven right at some point. Totally. And then this weasel hiding behind his computer is going to be crying in his mother's basement. You know?
Well,
sorry.
That's okay. That's fine.
Feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, speaking of anatomical anomalies, I'd also like to touch on another area that you guys covered in the book, which is the double rows of teeth found on these skeletons that are really strange. I don't know if they're connected to any kind of advanced intellectual capacity or amazing mathematical abilities or anything like that, but I'd just like to get you guys to talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Shall I give my view on this first, Jim?
Sure. We may have different views on it, but yes.
This is very controversial now. This is very, very controversial. There's been a lot of skeptics harassing us about this. But when we were putting the book together, TV show, I mean, there's quite a lot of reports of you know, double rows of teeth, extra teeth, supernumerary teeth. There are accounts in the Smithsonian actual annual reports. There's one account from Florida where even a third row of teeth was coming through. That's very specific. Some of them are very specific. Some of them very clearly explain that there's two rows of teeth. But the parlance of the time is what has caused problems here, because now we're realizing some of them, you know, and we do mention this in the book, but we didn't really have, at the time, we didn't go into it because we needed a bit more time with it, really. But there are some accounts around the world. I mean, people do get two rows of teeth. There are people with extra teeth. I've had people contact me who said they had sort of freakishly tall people in their family who had two rows of teeth, and they had to get them removed. So it is a genuine phenomena, whatever the skeptics say. But when you're looking at the 1800s, you've got a bit of a problem there, because often you could be describing literally two rows of teeth. Could be in the upper jaw and the lower jaw. So there's a bit of a debate about that going on. And Andy White was one of the people who really, really became quite angry and abusive towards me and Jim about this. He did, and it's still on his website, in fact. And so, you know, but then so Jim's been in contact with him and talking with him about it. So I think there's something going on there, but not all of the accounts can be, you know, absolutely 100% sure about it. I mean, we did say that in the book. We never claimed every single one of these accounts is true, but there are just some accounts which are just so descriptive and clear in what they're saying that it's really hard to ignore it as a thing. I mean, we spoke to the dental anthropologist from New York University, and she was intrigued by it because she showed us evidence of extra teeth occurring, you know, in prehistory. She showed us some, you know, actual examples which we looked at and we featured in the TV show and in the book. So it is a thing, but And she suggested maybe it's because of the size of the person. There's a trigger, a genetic trigger, which more teeth would grow in. And we know from the Canadian Lakes area, there was tribes who were growing, on average, they were increasing in height by about an inch every 100 years, or was it 1,000 years? And they also had extra teeth. Some had double rows of teeth, and this was clearly stated in the academic record. So there is a thing going on with that. But some of them are to do, the problem is the parlance of the time, the way people used to speak back then. Over to you, Jim.
Yeah. Andy White, anthropologist from South Carolina, I talked to him. He had written about double rows of teeth around when we were doing our show. So I spoke with his anthropology class a couple times, and we hung out for a couple days and talked about all these things. And he was saying that when he was doing reports in the 80s, he started to find all these accounts of giants with double rows of teeth working as an archaeologist or an anthropologist. And he came up with this idea that he thought it was the parlance of the time. A double row of teeth meant like perfect teeth, like up and down, because, these colonists obviously had far worse teeth than the native skulls that often had perfect teeth. And I believe he's onto something. I believe that, a lot of the accounts we find, like in England and France, they never mention double rows of teeth. They do mention jawbone over the face, however. And I came to the conclusion that I think some are legitimate, like the Smithsonian reports of even a third row of teeth, the supernumerary teeth. But I don't think like every account of double rows of teeth is so, because you would find more in the anthropological record. You would find more evidence of this, like professionals, like there's graveyards of teeth in New York. Graveyards of skeletons they're all portrayed as having double rows of teeth. And it's like, if there are 300 skeletons with double rows of teeth, then we're going to see more of this in the record. So I believe that Andy is probably correct to a certain extent, and then Hugh is correct in saying that some of these are like weird anatomic anomalies or supernumerary teeth or something else is going on. But what I was telling Andy was that this strengthens my case even further, that these are real human skeletons that were documented, right? This is another like layer of it. Like, yeah, you're analyzing a skull and you're looking at the teeth, and if they're not double, you're commenting on how perfect they are, or how the jaw fits over the face, because this whole thing gets dismissed as like these are all hoaxes or mastodon bones. And I'm like, no, these are human skeletons. They are stationary objects. They're not getting up and moving around, and they are being measured by, professionals at the time, given specific measurements. So it kind of strengthens the argument that there's more to look at in this mystery. So that's my take.
Well, one of the things that you guys brought up in the book that I thought made a lot of sense in relation to these double rows of teeth was the fact that
it was probably my chapter.
Well, I mean, it was. I think even the anthropological dentist that you guys were dealing with was the one who said it, that the giant's jaws were so big that the mouth maybe had naturally grown a second row of teeth. Mm-hmm.
Well, you mean you're that big, you got to eat a lot of food. Maybe you need a few more teeth to chew it with.
But what were they eating? That's the question.
Yeah.
Were they cannibals and all that? You need extra teeth to get through.
Get to that marrow.
Yeah.
It could be a weird thing like 6 fingers and 6 toes too. It could be some literal anatomic anomaly associated with enormous people of the past. Once again, who's rocking 6 fingers and 6 toes? It's the weirdest thing. It's like, I know people have it. It's funny because it's a genetic condition, but it's clearly associated with giants. Once again, it's like the author Edgar Cayce talks about it. Like I said, petroglyph statues in the South Pacific, all these isolated islands. Why did all the creator gods have 6 fingers and toes? I saw a 15th century painting of Adam, from the dude from Adam and Eve, and he has 6 fingers. It's like, what the hell is going on, man? It's like, this world is like, when you view it from the lens of what we're talking about, it's like a David Lynch movie. It is such a freak show, Yeah.
Hey, yeah, Twin Peaks, giants, dwarves.
Right?
All right, well, How are you guys doing for time? Do we have any more questions that we wanted to ask the guys?
What is it? Well, I thought it was pretty fascinating how a lot of scientists are really just super focused on their specialty, like geologists, and then you have archaeologists and anthropologists and astrologists. And I like how you guys try and bring these sciences together to come up with some sort of ideas or conclusions instead of being so hyper-focused in their one field. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. No, that's a great point. Hyper-specialization of the fields in academia is a problem. Just like it happens in the physician, It's do no harm is thrown out the window. You have just a different, you go to the doctors, right? Prescription, especially if you're older. It's like, where's the holistic approach to this, right? It's clearly wrong, and we know that. We know that Pfizer is a bunch of, sociopaths just pushing drugs off-label. They know the side effects, and they're like, it's like Ford with the Pinto blowing up. We'll pay out the death money because we know blank equals blank, and it happens in the pharmaceutical industry and in academia. It's an over-specialization. There was not a holistic look at it. A comparative mythologist would look at this whole thing differently and say, wow, look at the stunning connections. But if I am entirely focused in one direction and one mode of inquiry, of course I'm not going to see that. So I don't blame. I don't look at it like there's a conspiracy. I see it as an aspect of an inefficient, inaccurate way to view history.
All right. Any final thoughts, Hugh?
I just encourage listeners. I say this at every radio thing we do, is like, people in America or around the world, please, we're check your local records, please. Check your local archives, even check your garden, see if there's any giant skulls. Because there's this is how we find things. This is how the research really comes together. This is how, local journals, that kind of thing, people it's an important aspect of it, because, relying on the internet isn't all where it's at. A lot of our research was not on the internet, and we had to kind of go into the old records, the old book, go to libraries and things like this. This is where the new stuff comes from. The new discoveries rather come from. Obviously, it's old stuff, and so we just encourage people to do that all around the world. Just anything you hear about, even if you've got a local legend that can often lead to a discovery, it can lead to something else. And this is what I've been doing locally here, and I've been finding more and more. So that side of things is intriguing, and needs to, we just encourage people to get in touch with us. They can contact us through the Giants on Record, or search for the Lost Giants Facebook page. Both Jim and I, just are Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira, we're both on Facebook, or they can contact me through megalithomania.co.uk. And and we just, we'd love to hear from people if they've got anything they can share.
Great. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, guys. Listeners, we've been talking to Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman, authors of Giants on Record. Recommend you check it out. You can get it on Amazon and probably order it from your local bookshop. So thanks again, guys. It's been great talking to you. I mean, we learned a lot, and it's just such a fascinating, so many fascinating topics in the plural. So keep up the good work, and we look forward to what you bring out in the future.
Nice. Thanks a lot, guys. Good questions. Really enjoyed it.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Hugh.
Cheers.
Jim and Hugh, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week. So everyone take care.